Monsieur Jean-Paul Servet, he's the head of the Belgian FSA, but he's speaking to us today in his capacity as chair of IOSCO. So, Cher Jean-Paul, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's always a pleasure to be a speech where I am based in Brussels, not far from here, I would say, and in my capacity as IOSCO chair. I would like also, first of all, to thank you and the Crypto Council Innovation for inviting me to give a speech, a keynote speech, as the chair of IOSCO. As we all know, the themes of today's conference is shaping the digital future. Excellent idea, Mark, thanks for that. Now, I would like maybe to add something which can seem a little bit arrogant, or even too arrogant. I apologize for that. I'm not objective, of course, in my capacity as chair, but may I just suggest that I think that the digital future in the financial sector could be impacted by the transformative work that IOSCO has been leading on crypto, digital asset, and decentralized finance over the past 3 years. Of course, we are not the only one. Of course, the 3 co-legislators, of course, the FSB and other national, regional, and international standard-setting body and regulators. But if I may, I would say, as we look forward to ongoing policy work, I should note in passing that IOSCO launched a new work stream in 2024. So we start, I would say, not a long time ago, but we were able to deliver a lot. I will come back on this during my speech, but I would say we are still involved in a lot of new areas, of course, as stressed by the Belgian minister. We must dare speak about innovation. And as a regulator, you don't have to think, because I know that many of you are also representative of the industry, we are not against innovation, let us be clear. I am using a lot of artificial intelligence. As national regulator, it means that I have the pleasure to work with more or less 400 people. And I have to tell you that some time ago, we decided, I would say, to launch a new team with only people having a PhD specialized in data extraction management. So it means that I'm also working a lot with artificial intelligence as a financial cop. It means even if, and Marcel is no more there, even if the European Commission doesn't allow me to perform ex-ante supervision of advertising coming from the insurance industry, and I have the capacity to push on a button every day and to see what I can see via web scraping about doubtful advertisement for life insurance contracts. So it means that artificial intelligence means for people like me that there is also maybe an evolution in what we think from an institutional point of view about new capacity. Of course, our work is to see if some aspect of innovation can be not only an opportunity, not only a challenge, but also a risk for you, if you are a private investor, for John and Mary in the street, for kids investing and losing from time to time, even more than time to time, their money when they decide to invest in Bitcoin and other crypto. So it's a balanced approach, I would say, in order to be helpful. And so that's what we decide to do, I would say, with a view to tackle the new forms of risk arising from the use of artificial intelligence tokenization. But let me start with what we've been able to do. And I would like to give you, I would say, comment about 4 aspects. First of all, why IOSCO? Quite surprising. I would say that the chair of IOSCO say, not sure that we have to be there, but I think that I have to explain why we think that we have to be there. I'm not sure that we are so popular for that, especially from people coming from the crypto industry, but we have to explain. So that's about our accountability. Second aspect, if I may, I would say, what are the conclusions of our past and common work stream? What's the impact for the jurisdiction all around the world? And last but not least, next step, I would say, especially some comment about artificial. First of all, one comment about IOSCO and why we are involved with fintech. It's something for me important to explain that, native from Brussels, I would say, and based in Brussels, especially knowing that, correct me, that EU is, I think, not the region for which you have the lowest level of regulation in the financial sector. So what do we need, you would say? IOSCO. We have MiCA. Before we had the 5th directive, AML. Okay, the objective is not that Schönbergen is a competitor for Jean-Paul Servet and the member of IOSCO. In fact, we are working together. For instance, ESMA is an observer to the IOSCO board. I have the pleasure to work with many supervisors coming from the EU. We are also members of ESMA. So it's not, I would say, a competition. I think that I may say there is no overlapping. Just the question is to see who is the best placed for taking initiative for supervising. And that's, I think, instrumental when we take action about, I would say, crypto. Because by definition, we need that crypto business is by definition a cross-border issue, risk, and challenge. At the same time, and it's not a critic at all because I see different friends, representative of the three co-legislator, Commission, Parliament, and Council of Ministers. We in Europe sometimes tend to think that European rulemaking has a head start when it comes to financial regulation. And at the same time, that while this can be true, not frequently, but I think in many cases, I would say, much of its rulebook is inspired from international agreed standards. And as most of you will know, maybe IOSCO is the recognized international standard-setting body for financial market, financial product, consumer protection, and fair and transparent market regulation. So what does it mean, I would say? IOSCO is 50 years old, but at the start, it started in the Americas. I would say that the story of the current IOSCO, it means 40 years. I think that it's useful to stress the following, which is not so well known by many people, I have to say. That IOSCO principle, and I hope that it doesn't seem too arrogant, and I apologize for that, but it's fair to say that IOSCO principle and recommendation have shaped the EU regulatory framework for asset management. Yes, you sit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 20, maybe in some years when we will retire. The starting point, it was high-level principle at IOSCO level. The same for benchmark. The same for creating rating, and I was involved with my team in the former Belgian presidency, able to find a compromise with many of you about ESG rating. I had the pleasure to see that in the recitals and about the underlying philosophy of the new binding EU regulation devoted to ESG rating, the starting point is also IOSCO. Well, it's quite normal, because I would say first thing first. You start at global level, of course. We never vote, by the way. It's like United Nations, even if I think it's Chatham Rules, President, that we are a little bit faster than in New York for taking decisions, I would say. So we never vote. It's consensus, which means, in fact, unanimity. But it means that you have the capacity to tackle many issues at global level. And then, if necessary, if useful, if proportionate, you can translate it through binding regulation at national level of, I would say, voluntary approach of, like in the EU, most of the time, binding regulation. And in fact, it's not a surprise, because IOSCO, it means the global capacity to tackle this risk of pathogen. I'm not sure that you know that we have 130 jurisdictions on board. So it means that my colleague and myself, the SEC, the BaFin, the IFM, IMF, the Japanese FSA, Hong Kong, and so on, we are involved in various capacity in 95% of the supervision of all the financial sector all around the world. And besides, if I may, we have, I would say, a majority of growth and emerging market, or growth and emerging market committees, even the largest, I would say. Which is, I think, important when we speak about crypto, because we know that from both sides of the interaction between platforms and John and Mary in the street, you have different jurisdiction most of the time, and even different continent, and even different level of sophisticated market versus growing emerging. So we have the capacity to discuss that, I would say, at level, with the support of a different standing committee. And given the cross-border nature of crypto market, that's the reason why we decide, I would say, to take action, knowing that there were, of course, risk of regulatory arbitrage and the significant risks of harm for retail investors. And so it became clear that those risks fell within IOSCO mandate to protect investors and promote the integrity of financial market. One of primary goals has been to promote greater consistency in how IOSCO members approach the regulation and oversight of crypto asset activities. Again, we are not against innovation. We work on it. We try to be helpful in order to avoid accident, scandals, trust, which means that by definition you will have, I would say, collateral damage even on the best players in the crypto world. That's our objective. And that's the reason why we decide to launch a task force. Task force means in IOSCO Volapük, we say in Brussels of IOSCO language, it means capacity to launch a fast-track approach with many people on board, many work streams, with a clear objective. That's what we did with the Sustainable Task Force, who is chaired, for instance, by my colleague Rodrigo Benaventura, the chair of the Spanish Affairs Organization, who will become the new Secretary General of IOSCO in some weeks. And that's what we decide also to launch with the FinTech Task Force, chaired by my colleague and friends from Singapore. And we know what it means, Singapore, by definition innovation. I'm not sure that many of you had the capacity to go in Singapore for the FinTech Week. For me, that was an amazing experience because I had the pleasure to explain our toolkit. 80,000 people, 80,000 people. It's also important to stress that we launch this task force before the crypto winter, on time. So it's not governed by accident, let us be clear. But take into account, I would say, a very strong, I would say, professional decision-making process, due process with consultation, feedback from the industry and other stakeholders. We have been able to take into account what happens with some accident scandals during the crypto winter. That's very important. I think that I may say that we have one of the most comprehensive framework at international level, and we have also the most recent, I would say, paper on this. Just because we start on time, we were able to take into account what happens in order to have something which can be useful not only for 1 year, but for the next year. Of course, let us be clear, I would say we were not the only one. We start hand in hand with the FSB, the Financial Stability Board, which was also decide to launch another group about stable coins, led by my colleague and friend from the Netherlands, Steven Major, and we work together. So if you have a look on both papers, there is no overlapping. I would say I was invited to give speech to the task force chaired by Steven, and the contrary also happens. And the reason why we decide to work also, by definition, with other standard-setting bodies like the FSB is that one of our primary goals has been to promote greater consistency in how IOSCO members approach the regulation and oversight of crypto asset activities. Second point of my speech. What are the conclusions of our work on crypto and digital assets? We have been able, first of all, to, I would say, to deliver on time. When I had the pleasure to be elected, I was the only one candidate at the time and re-elected in the meantime by the IOSCO board. My first comment was to say speed. Maybe not necessarily what we expect from people like me. Speed about sustainable finance, done. We endorse ISSB standard. Speed about NBFI work and working together with SSB down. We deliver, I would say, a new toolkit about liquidity of open management fund, and speed about crypto asset. Done as well. Why? Not per se, because John and Mary in the street, retail investors, are not interested at all in working with an alphabet soup when they decide to invest in ESG assets. They would like to have one toolkit. But John and Mary in the street also have kids who are investing and from time to time losing their money in crypto asset. So speed as well, I would say. So it's not only a request from the FSB, from the Open Commission, from the G20 and so on of IOSCO. It's a request coming from all citizens. And that's the most important for us. And that's the reason why the speed was so important. And that's the reason why at the end of November 2022, we published 16 recommendations tailored for crypto assets with a view to safeguard investor and market integrity. And you know, of course, the starting point, I presume. These recommendations are underpinned by the principle of same activities, same risk, same regulatory outcomes. So it means that I think that I may say that we demonstrated that the underlying crypto actives are actually equivalent to those observed in the traditional financial market. The risks as well are similar to those our members supervise and enforce on a daily basis, such as conflict of interest, market manipulation, insider trading, custody, cyber risk. Is it so shocking for you, representative of the industry, that we dare say that we have to avoid conflict of interest, that we must be strong in price discovery, that you must be able to have a sound architecture in order to avoid cyber risk? Is it so shocking for you to say that by definition, segregation of assets is instrumental? If you used to be already the victims of people like me when you used to work for a stock exchange many years ago, if you used to be an asset manager, these principles are quite obvious. That's what we are used to do for 30 years, 40 years. Nothing revolutionary. We are not reinventing the wheel. Just applying principles which are rather obvious, I would say. It's like for carbon market. The challenge for people like me, and that's the reason why, Mark, I'm so happy also to be today, is the outreach. I'm not sure that many of you know how we are. It's not a critic. We are not supervised in many jurisdictions. And you would like maybe to understand what we have to apply, I would say. Most of the time, we have, I would say, a classical audience, people who are forced to see us. CFO, CRO, CEO, compliance officer with a fit and proper. Maybe that we don't have this kind of Pavlov reflex to say, okay, why? Maybe we could be useful to understand what could be useful in order to avoid, I would say, poor practices. The feedback I receive from the crypto industry, I am fine with it. It's obvious. And that's the best way for me to distinguish my business from poor practices or scandals. I would say it's a win-win approach. And when you see the recommendation, you will see most of the time it's not revolutionary. But it means that, I would say, the reason for that is that we decide to apply a regulatory approach that is consistent with, again, IOSCO principle and associated standards for security market. And this is why we already took measure to enhance collaboration and cooperation between IOSCO members. For this, we have an excellent tool, which I'm used to say that's the best marketing tool for IOSCO. That's the MMOU, Multilateral Memorandum of Understanding. So that's what we use in order to exchange information between IOSCO members, in order to detect, to tackle, and to take action against possible case of market abuse, insider trading, and so on. The first year of the MMOU, it was in 2004. At the time, we exchanged 50 times a year information. Now, we are doing that 6,000 times a year. So it means that when I ask an information about the final beneficiary of a transaction performed on a stock exchange, someone selling or buying a transaction, I will ask an information to other colleagues, even very far from Belgium, even other continent. And in 92% of the case, I will receive an answer in less than 100 days. 100 days. So it means that my colleague will have to ask to the broker, the sub-broker, who is the guy, who is the person who decides to sell or to buy. So it means that we have the capacity to do that. And I have also to tell you that we already have our own journey with some transaction, I would say, with an underlying linked with crypto assets. So it means that collaboration about investigation also works. And that's my next point. What impact for jurisdiction and crypto asset service provider? So we were able to improve that very fast. So it means less than 1 year after my election. I was very happy and even proud, let us be clear, because it was not so easy. You have jurisdiction with a full set on enforcement toolkit. For different reasons, you have jurisdiction without regulation, or with regulation without enforcement, with a bespoke approach. So that's the reason why we had to find a common approach, and we have been able to do that. Now, what's the impact for jurisdiction? So we are now committing our attention to support the implementation by jurisdiction of our crypto and digital asset recommendation. We have agreed a clear and robust crypto asset implementation road map to leverage IOSCO convening power and global footprint to that end. A year has passed since the publication of the recommendation, and it has become clear from our implementation efforts that jurisdictions are at different stages of implementing framework to regulate crypto asset activities. That's the advantage of working with IOSCO. We don't have any political legitimacy. I am not the spokesman of the Belgian chair and of the Belgian government, and as IOSCO chair, I don't have any political legitimacy. But whenever we have capacity to find a consensus, it means that at national level or even at European level, you have the capacity to double down on an effort, to say, look, there is a consensus between 130 jurisdictions. So it can be useful for the credibility of your jurisdiction. And that's what we are doing also by working with other SSB. And that's the reason why I have the pleasure to tell you that the IMF start using our toolkit about crypto asset by taking that on board for the famous Article 4 and F submission. Article 4 means the classical visit every year in a jurisdiction to test the quality, the resilience of the financial sector, and also, I would say, the capacity of supervision of this. So it's part of the journey. That's fantastic for us, I would say, because it's a winning approach. IMF doesn't have to start to launch a new journey, and we have, of course, the pleasure to see. It was also the case at FSB level. If you have a look on the G20 letters, except the last one, 10 days a day sent by Klaas Knot the recent years, 4 pages, excellent paper, very analytical, excellent drafting. 50% of the 4 pages is about what we are doing at IOSCO. NBFI, sustainable finance, and last but not least, crypto. So it means that what we are trying to do together seems to be successful and useful also for the FSB and G20 leaders. I'm very happy to have this, the G20, I would say, supporting of effort and the FSB. And now the IMF, through the Article 4 and F submission, that's every 4 years, it's an in-depth analysis. We are also starting discussion with the FATF, I would say GAFI in French, I would say, in order to see to which extent it can be used. Next step, it will be the last part of my speech. One comment about DeFi, I would say the so-called positive agenda, I would say, in comparison to the crypto asset sensu stricto. We also published a set of recommendations for regulating DeFi in 2023. I have to say, which is not a surprise for experts of DeFi, that our DeFi recommendations are more principle-based and less prescriptive, of course, than the crypto and digital asset recommendation. And their primary focus is on risk identification and monitoring, capacity building, and cooperation. But one surprise for me and for my colleague was to say that, sorry to say that it's a little bit ridiculous, but okay, let us try to elaborate on this, that that DeFi was maybe more centralized than we would have expected. So what does it mean for people like us? It means that if it's more centralized than expected, it means that you must have some people in charge inside the organization. It doesn't mean that we would like to apply a fit and proper aspect like for banks, not the same business. But I think one of the key and non-expected aspects of this report was to emphasize the importance for regulators to identify the responsible person entities of DeFi arrangement and to subject this responsible person to the applicable regulatory framework. New stream, not a surprise, already stressed by the former speaker, artificial intelligence are, of course, it's at the center of IOSCO policy priorities. And that's what we are doing more and more, I would say, over the past few years, and that is likely, of course, to remain an important point of attention in the years ahead, artificial intelligence and its use within the financial sector. What does it mean, in other words? Because for me, as IOSCO chair, the objective is not to copy and paste what has been. Everybody is speaking about artificial intelligence. Let us be clear. Also in our private life. So again, the question is, okay, why IOSCO? Because I'm not saying that IOSCO must be there for everything. It's a globalism, and because there are some impact about the financial sector. So what does it mean, in other words? It means that generative artificial intelligence and related technological development have the potential, of course, to increase the efficiency of capital market across core activities, including trading, investment asset against. We are not against innovation, at the contrary. But, and I am not the only one to say that, if you have a look of the last report of the IMF, you maybe know that the IMF dedicated a whole chapter to this in the latest and the famous Global Financial Stability Report last month. And IMF was not the only one. IOSCO was not the only one. The FSB also published its initial findings about the impact of IE on financial stability. In fact, artificial intelligence is already being used across financial market ecosystem to optimize portfolio management, improve internal research capabilities, analyze complex unstructured data, or to make investment recommendations. But this is my duty as IOSCO chair to say that besides the opportunity, there are also substantial risks that must be addressed to safeguard investor protection, market integrity, and financial stability, the three pillars of our mission statement, IOSCO level. And these risks are clearly identified in our 2025-26 risk outlook that will soon be released. Let me share some examples to illustrate our concern. Three, if I may, in a nutshell. First, as artificial intelligence and Gen artificial intelligence tools becomes more accessible, there is growing concern, as you know, about the increased use for financial advice. This is not Jean-Paul Servais saying, just Deloitte. As you know, there is a report published recently by a Deloitte Center for Financial Services which anticipate that generative artificial intelligence application would likely become the leading source of retail investment advice by 2027. Okay, we know what it means about economy scale, but does it mean that it's only about artificial intelligence when you have a focus about retail investment? That will be an important aspect of our works. Investment advice represents a risk to retail investor, and risk in retail investor is a more and more important work stream at IOSCO level. And we have determined to tackle this, but it's not the only one. Second example, artificial intelligence-driven high-frequency trading could also lead to potential flash market crashes. Another example, and I will stop with this last example, the high concentration of artificial intelligence model supply could also lead to herding behaviors, yes, with detrimental impact on underlying assets and investors. And the objective of IOSCO, ladies and gentlemen, is therefore to develop a shared understanding among IOSCO members of this issue, risk and challenges presented by emerging artificial intelligence technology through the lens of market integrity. Again, we are not competing with the FSB, the Basel Committee, EIS. We are focused about our mission statement, which means market integrity, financial stability, and investor protection, as well as assist member capacity building is important when you have 130 jurisdictions and the majority being, I would say, growth and emerging market in their policy response. If deemed appropriate, IOSCO may consider tools, recommendation, or consideration that will provide guidance to IOSCO member and how to address issue, risk, and challenges posed by artificial intelligence. The appropriate form of guidance will be determined by the findings of our ongoing work. And as the regulators go through their policy-making process, it is essential that we, along with other regulators and international organizations, adopt a coordinated cross-sectoral approach in developing policy in response to potential benefit and emerging risk of artificial intelligence technology across the financial. And we are keen to support responsible innovation, but we'll always consider this issue with a risk-based approach to ensure balanced outcomes that support our objective. My last word will be as follows. First, it's our responsibility as regulator to critically analyze the emerging risk presented by technological innovation, whether in artificial intelligence, tokenization, DLT, crypto, etc., with a balanced approach. Second, last conclusion, in our assessment of the risk and consideration of policy response, we will continue to apply the well-known principle of same activities, same risk, same regulatory outcome. And this in order to deliver on time on our mandate of protecting investors, safeguarding market integrity, and mitigating financial stability risk. Thanks for the attention, and I wish you a pleasant day in Brussels.